Hey, welcome back. So I want to demonstrate what do we do with the thoughts that we've had so far. So one thing about every part of user experience design is there's some kind of deliverable, and what's kind of neat is they're pretty idiosyncratic. There's some that people might understand, like service blueprints. Those are concepts that have been refined and they over time have become things, but basically they all started as just some way to tell a story and to engage others in the thoughts that you're having. And right now we're talking about information architecture. We looked at data. We've got a spreadsheet which I can pull up for a moment, and we've got this data that either we had something to do with or more likely are just given in a sense to organize. And that's great. So we need an outcome. We need something to create so that we can have discussions, kind of see where we're right or wrong, and iterate perhaps. So I'm going to start with just a very simple example, and you can scale it however you like. I'm going to use right now I'm using JS Fiddle, but you could do this on a piece of paper, just type it if you wanted to. The goal is to have something to talk over with the team, with the extended group, because the whole point of this part of our journey, we're right now kind of in the pattern to information journey. So we want something to become information, and I'm gonna tease you that this is actually going to become information, even though you and almost everyone else will not think that that is the case. So bear with me, that is the reveal at the end of this video. Let me, however, just show you the mechanics behind why we're doing this. So right now you see a fake thing. I typed this out just to indicate that we're talking about a song. So songs have an artist, a title, length, album. It's super simple. You might have 20 to 30 different fields or not. What's important here is that you've looked at this and you're trying to figure out how can I use some sort of grouping tags, which is HTML that we spoke about in the last video. So HTML is just a language. It isn't, in a sense, hopefully not intimidating, because I think it's only 20 to 30 words, most of which you really don't have to worry about. What you do have to worry about is structures. So just like if you were building a building or designing, well, that's a pretty good one. If you're building a building, you don't want to invent a lot of stuff. You want to say, okay, we're going to use 2x4s, we're going to use drywall, we're going to use these things that we use to build buildings, and here's the shapes and structures that I want to build out of it. And you're going to think so abstractly, but I'm positing that at least in my course and how I try to do this in my own work, it's a great way to just talk structurally so people don't get bogged down in things that may not be important right now. So we've got the first set of tags is just a fake record. And even though it shows up here, and apologies, I tried to turn this into light mode to make it easier to read, but I guess that's not a thing. So here are just examples from the first row of my database. And what I'm using is the actual header name. So in each of the columns, you've got a header, which indicates, well, what's in this column? And that relationship is already really, really important and something that is worth having discussions about. So for example, if you don't understand it or you don't know what it's used for, it's really good to know why is this here? What is it meant to accomplish? So my example came from iTunes, and a lot of the data in the iTunes database comes from things like how often I've played it and things that are very unique, I think, to iTunes. And there's nothing necessarily bad about that. Spotify might also keep track of how many times you have played something, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. We don't want to jump into knowledge yet, because personalization and knowledge are going to come as we get a little bit more of the basics out of the way. So enough said. That was a big explanation. Let me get into HTML. So first of all, we've got these words. So let's just start with, hey, we're going to have something here. We're not really designing a web page. We're just talking structurally, 2x4s. Imagine that. So start with well, let me just get these three out of the way. So There's no right or wrong words here. This is just about, okay, could the whole page be a series of or one article? Maybe. Let's keep like that. That's not bad. I don't want to make it too complicated. So let's just say the whole page of all the data that we're going to display is some sort of article, and then each is going to be a section. There are other choices, but I'm just going to go with those. So now each section is going to contain these pieces of data, and my job is to think, well, what in this is important? So the operative tag that you want to start thinking about is hierarchy. For whatever reason, I always start with H2s. I never use H1 except for the title of the page, which has become to be accepted, maybe. It was a big debate I remember having once about not having too much hierarchy. That's my point. You want enough, because hierarchy is, for one, extremely it indicates a lot of things. It says underneath this is something important. This piece of data is important. Underneath it is, and what it structures is also important. So we know that in this context we want to talk about the name of song. So the song title is Hello, It's Me. I think I made this up. Okay, so great. Now we've got our song title. It's the H2. Now this song is the parent of what? So there are other relationships here, but I know that one thing about this song is its artist. So we can say, what tag are we going to pick for the artist? The artist is certainly important. We could pick another header, and it's not terrible. Oops, there we go. It's not terrible to have another header. I like it to head up something. So in this case, maybe we get to a paragraph, and we say, now we've got this title in it. Okay, so we've picked 3 tags, and now this is where I think what we want to do is come up with something structural inside of this. So I'm going to use the details tag. And in the details, I'm going to have a list. So I'll put in year. And this will be rep. And then I put in this subgenre here, so we'll put that in there too. Okay, so far not too bad. Now we've got this one thing about time. There is a tag called time, which, why not? That's the point. You know, look for tags that are going to be as descriptive as possible to what the content is. And I'll show you why in just a second. So this one is 3 and 34. Okay, so what I've just completed here is fine as a first pass. We've got a structure called details that has some things in it. What we're missing right now is we're not really saying what these are, but we're actually relying on the fact that they might be readable. This is a really important part. If you do need something like year released, where is that going to come from? See, so remember, you've got 2 things. One thing is going to come straight out of a database. It says 2018, but now you need a label on top of that that says new release. And if you do have something like that, you might want to give it a tag. And that tag in this case could be it could kind of work. So 2 things are happening here. One, you're slightly confused and maybe unfamiliar with this world of HTML tags. You might, as I am, try to struggle with, well, what is this stuff? And I will just say all encompassing, that is why you're doing this. There is no right or wrong answer as to structurally what goes on this page. What is going to happen sooner or later is that you are going to want to focus on one or two pieces within this in order to create your in order to code your design. So your design is going to come in a minute. I'm going to show you actually an example of this, but what I like about this approach is that you really want to sit and give this some thought. I've thought about it for all of 2 or 3 minutes, and I can look now to say, well, this is a little bit clumsy, this H1, H2 here. Paragraphs for the title don't seem perfectly right. Oh, by the way, we might also have an image in here, so we might as well say, okay, there's some sort of image or album cover. Which does make it interesting. Where is that going to go? That should be kind of a big deal. So let's say picture. Oops. Okay, so now there's a picture in a section. If you're not familiar with CSS, which we're not going to get into, but the goal of CSS is to be able to handle a rule, and one rule that many people are not taking as much advantage of is that if there's a structure that has a lot of different tags, it's fairly easy for CSS to focus on the behavior of a tag. So we could just say, hey, in every section H2, which is section H2, make that bold, or do whatever you like with it, and you'll see an example in just a second. So far, the idea is you want to use as many variety of tags within one record, because this guy here, this section, technically could repeat thousands of times. It's extremely repetitive. We haven't gotten into the page structure like the header, the footer, etc. That actually could be an interesting idea too. Let's add a header. And that even gives us a little bit more specificity that inside of the header, we want to put a picture and these two guys here. Yeah, that Drake did this song, Hello, It's Me by Drake. Okay, so now we've got more structure. So in a header, we've got a picture and this, and then outside of that structure, we've got this album. Well, actually, that even makes more sense. So now that picture really might want to go with this album, because this is the name of the album. And we're leaving out some really important things about this picture. But now inside the header, and then, let's see, is there room for one more tag to group the picture and this paragraph? Why not? We can say and oh, actually, let's end main here. Okay. I think that's right. It does seem to not like this, but main starts. Oh, that's why, because I haven't ended it. Okay, perfect. Okay. So right now, let's do a little bit of indentation. Okay. So the header contains our name, because we're talking about a song, and an artist, because that would make some sense, and they're H2, H3, which gives them a slight amount of importance. This probably doesn't need to be an H3. It'd be nice if there was a header down here, but I really, okay, let's do it. Let's make this an H3 as well. And there's some debate here that this could be an H2. I mean, the name of the album is pretty important, and so on and so forth. So right now, even just with these few lines of code, you can have a lot of conversation and debate, perhaps with anyone on the team, about, what is important, what is grouped together, what belongs together. And the thing that's tying this into design will be forthcoming. I'll show you why it's going to actually make your life a lot easier once you've told the team or discussed with the team the hierarchy of the data. And that's why we're doing this exercise. So you as a thinking person, if I went to ChatGPT and asked it to structure this record, which I will, and see what happens, I don't think it would have a clue. Again, there is no reason for any of this organization other than planning forward in your mind of what is actually important, what structurally 2x4s is going to be needed to create this record, and you're kind of designing for extreme repetition, which will be really helpful when it comes to CSS, that you've got a huge variety of tags. So let's just end with that. Huge variety of tags. These aren't HTML tags, although this is treating them like them, only because you can make up your own tags. In fact, there's a whole language called XML, which means make up your own tags. You can use any language to use this format to say this is a this. The reason why HTML5, and that's where these new tags came from, comes in handy is just being able to talk a little bit more specifically. Anyone coding this can just go in and create divs, and then they can start to add classes, which we're not adding. But the classes can be any word you can imagine, and that becomes confusing because if you can make up words, those words do have to communicate something to someone else. You can make up your own. You can make up a class called A, B, and C. They'll all work perfectly fine, but they're not very meaningful, and that's really what we're doing. What is more important for the world at large is that you have now created information, because this is 100% not only readable by a computer, it's actually going to be much easier to read by the bots that create search engines like Google. This structure is also helpful for ADA, which is a huge thing where people might not always look at a web page. It's important for ChatGPT as well, because it has to go through and not only just figure out the sequencing of words, but might need to figure out hierarchy of words. I don't think they're there yet, but the idea of what is the name of the chapter. You can understand the content of the chapter, but what is the chapter called? These are, I believe, uniquely creative and human things. I don't know that computers are they can make a guess, which is fine, but there's an art to this. You set up expectations by the structures that you create, and that's why I think this is interesting. Now, if you go over, I'm purposefully hiding this, so if I save this and run it, what is interesting is the first row, all these tags that I made up are just treated like a span tag. Or a tag that has no, a tag that does not take up space. So it just kind of runs together. And if you ever turn off CSS on any web page, it's always fun because it'll look a lot like this. It may, and mostly, is not readable like this. It'll usually be fairly messy because it wasn't intended to not have a style. This one, well, at least, this is the default style sheet, by the way, which is also normally removed for most websites. They just don't, they turn everything off so that they can reset everything. But in a default style sheet, one header is bigger than another, and so forth. And this new details tag has this strange behavior, which is kind of neat, that it opens and closes. It's something they just decided to add. You don't have to do that. So let me get to structurally, what can you do with this? So I'm going to go over to a page, and we're going to look at the source of it. And what we should be able to see here is that repetition of the data that goes into each of these particular groups. There's a picture, there's a list, etc. It's very similar. There are some classes added here, but they don't need to be here. There's a use of a few things like icons, etc. But this is really an entire record, and it repeats and repeats and repeats. And what I was going to get to is you don't have to. You could show a sketch, for example, of what it looks like, but this is with CSS how it renders in the browser. As a picture, that picture is linked to a website. There's some words, there's some icons, there's some, lots of fun stuff. There's also the addition of this ability at the top, which is where we're going to go next, of how do you group these. We have already grouped our music by genre, But you can make up these words as well. These are really interesting words. These are taxonomies and verbs. That is the next topic that we're going to get into. Is, okay, now you've got all these records, and they're going to repeat and repeat and repeat, and now you're going to have to move around and try to locate something or find something within all this data. Next topic. But there's a little script on this that says, well, if you wanted to just look at the things that fit within this particular topic, I can just show and hide and animate and do all these wonderful things, thanks to the wonderful people at Metaphysi who invented this 15 years ago, and it still works great. This is just a way to say, hey, we can add different words up here, and it can actually affect and change the display. But I hope you get at it. If you started here and you started drawing, you might be able to go backwards and create those structures, the things that we just did in HTML, but it works a lot better moving forward, because I could even say, looking at this, it's a bit, it's been around for a while, that I might want to completely redesign this, and I don't have to change the HTML at all to come up with a whole different way of showing this. Perhaps I'm going to use that detail view. Perhaps I'm going to show hide. Perhaps, I can change the design pretty much at will and not change the HTML, because structurally it says exactly what it needs to say. And that's our goal here. So try out HTML5, look at the tags, and start learning to, in your first go out as an information architect, use this controlled language. It's only, again, 40 or so terms to start to understand, how does this describe your content? And I think you're going to end up in a better place than you would be than if you started with design and let the front end and the HTML work itself out as you iterate through this. It's a little bit backwards, but it's going to work better. And then next, we're going to talk more words. So we're going to talk about those words that we group things with in the next video. All right, so just to follow up, I did ask ChatGPT, and guess what it did? Not bad, actually. So I asked it specifically for semantic HTML structure. So we can see here some similarities. Article and section were used. It's using figure instead of picture. I actually was just leaving that as a placeholder, because there's a lot of information that needs to go in to actually display a picture. So this is just fine. It's using figure caption and some other things. It's using this interesting item prop, which I'm not familiar with. I'm fine with it as long as it helps. It says here, by the way, item prop is there to help semantic meaning and give search engines something to do. You could also just use this, I guess, artist as a class. It might be able to figure that out too. I mean, words are words, which is fine, because that's where we're going to get. The use of words is the important part. It's amazingly, it used time, so I was pretty happy about that one. But structurally, it's H1 is the top. That's fine. It's not considering that there's a lot of these songs on this page. H2 is album. It's using genre as also a header to say what the genre is. So it's using a little bit more of a header data structure, which is great. Good for you. I don't think that this has changed too much from what we did. I think ours actually has a little bit more sophistication, but give it up. Hey, the ability to mark up semantic HTML based on data. Let's let ChatGPT give us a start. I have no problem with that. I do think, however, you're going to want to make sure that you understand why.